John Carpenter's The Thing is my favorite movie of all time. It is truly a masterpiece in every single way, so much so that I would passionately argue it's the greatest sci-fi horror film ever made, even greater than Ridley Scott's Alien. The story originated from a novel by John W. Campbell titled Who Goes There? The book was later adapted into a film in 1951 titled The Thing from Another World, but Campbell's idea would not be faithfully adapted until 1982 when John Carpenter's The Thing was released in theaters, ironically the same release year as Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Carpenter's movie excels in every way, from the acting, writing, storytelling, set design, and practical effects, bringing a horrifying science fiction concept to life. The Thing isn't just a classic, it was the result of a collaboration of talented artists who knew what the fuck they were doing. Unfortunately, this is not something I can say for the 2011 prequel. Instead, I can say the exact opposite. Which presents the question, how can someone take the blueprints to a perfect concept and fuck it up so badly that they remove everything that made the first film work? Well, that's what I'm here to answer, because there are so many goddamn things wrong with this movie that instead of going on forever about how perfect the original was, I'm going to do the best I can to highlight the superior qualities that made the first film great while explaining what was done wrong with the prequel. And no, it's not just CGI. For any of you who haven't watched the 1982 film, I highly implore you do so before watching this review. Anyways, let's get into it. To begin, I'd like to start by providing a quick plot description of what these movies are about. So the story starts with a helicopter pursuing a Siberian husky in the middle of Antarctica. The chase concludes once the dog reaches an American research base housed by 12 men. A short firefight ensues with the Americans killing the man and leaving to investigate the Norwegian base, only to find charred ruins and corpses, along with a strange ice casket and a pile of scorched biomass containing human remains. They haul it back to the American base where they perform an autopsy, after which the Siberian husky morphs into an alien creature and consumes their own dogs. After destroying the unknown creature, they learn from further autopsies, along with the Norwegian recordings and an investigation of the dig site, that the creature is an extraterrestrial being that had been thawed out of the ice for at least 100,000 years after its ship crashed in Antarctica, and has the special ability to infect and perfectly imitate any living organism and shapeshift into almost anything it desires, thanks to the fact that every cell of the creature is an individual animal, a part of a larger hive mind.
And in the process, shape its own cells to imitate them. This, for instance. That's not dog. It's imitation. We got to it before it had time to finish.
After one of their men is killed and assimilated by the Thing, they realize that any of them could be an alien copy at this point. So for the rest of the film, the characters try to figure out who is and isn't human while attempting to prevent any of it from escaping Antarctica and infecting all life on Earth. And no, I'm not gonna fucking say it! So the prequel is basically telling the story of what happened at the first research base before the Thing reached to the Americans. The first issue with this movie is that when it comes to being a prequel, it's not consistent at all with the first story. The biggest example of this is the way the alien spacecraft was set up. Like, just look how it's presented in the original and in the prequel. In the first movie, they show them blasting the ice out of the way so the entire top side of the craft is exposed to the outside. But in this movie, it's in a giant underground cavern for the entire duration of the movie. And the only time they use explosives is by the end of the movie, when she uses a bunch of grenades to blow the entire thing up. But from the recordings, you can tell that the explosions were planned and happened long before this event even happened. Not only that, the film was recorded during the daytime, and there was absolutely nobody there to record the event. So if we're going by the logic of this movie, how the fuck were these recordings even made? So yeah, the writers fucked up on that part, which is kind of a problem when you're trying to provide an explanation of what happened to the first base. I know it sounds nitpicky, but this shit is important if you're going to make an effective prequel film. Either you make it consistent, or the fans of the original, much like myself, will just be distracted and a little annoyed. It just kind of makes you continuously think that they should have gone back and watched the original before filming the fucking movie! Those of you who are familiar with my channel know that the most important thing I value in filmmaking is the character writing. The most memorable aspect of this movie besides the alien was the characters, which was something that John Carpenter excelled at. He, including everyone involved in the writing, knew how to create believable and distinguishable characters. Not only that, he knew how to direct actors, and every single actor had a perfect performance. I swear to God, there have been multiple people in my life, including my father's life, that have looked and acted exactly like like several of the characters in this movie. They all act like real people, or I guess real alien imitations of people. Not to mention how each one of them has a memorable line of dialogue.
I don't know what the hell's in there, but it's weird and pissed off, whatever it is.
I know you gentlemen have been through a lot. And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
You gotta be fucking kidding.
And here lies the biggest problem with this movie. I'm sure anyone who's watched the first movie remembers most of the names of the characters. That's Blair, that's McCree, that's Childs, that's Copper, and that's Clark, and so on and so forth. But I don't believe for a second that any of you can remember the names of the prequel characters. What's this guy's name? What about that guy? Or her? Not a single fucking one of these dudes is memorable in the slightest. In fact, after watching this movie for the first time, I even found myself confusing this dude with this other dude. They can all be chalked up to either cliche, egotistical assholes or blank slates set up to be alien food. I know this is a common problem in the sci-fi horror genre as a whole, but it's extremely detrimental when you're trying to write this kind of story. Seeing how the Thing sows distrust throughout the entire camp while hiding in the shadows waiting for the perfect time to strike is incredibly intriguing. It's very easy to put yourself in the character's shoes and be left guessing which person should and shouldn't be trusted, and all of that is completely lost when you write characters that aren't special and given no development whatsoever. I'll give credit to the actors though and say they did their best with what they got. Like, they pull off their utterly horrifying reactions to getting assimilated by the alien quite well, especially considering they don't have anything really to react to since it's all just shitty CGI.
Ass and titties.
This is probably the most disappointing aspect of this movie, and again, no, I'm not just talking about the CG, even though I will get to that later. You see, the Thing is probably the most dangerous alien life form ever put on film. Just think about it. A single cell of it could infect and assimilate not only an entire organism, but all life on Earth if it gets out of Antarctica. It can perfectly imitate almost any creature it comes into contact with, including behavior and memories. And this concept works perfectly for a horror movie.
I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you'd just attack me right now. So some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to. But it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
Being completely isolated from the rest of the world in the middle of a desolate continent with a creature that can morph into any horrifying thing it wants, not knowing who to trust while simultaneously fearing being infected is enough to break anyone psychologically. Unless, of course, you happen to be Kurt Russell.
Fuck you too!
But for some reason in this movie, they can't fucking help themselves from downgrading the Thing and forcing all these convoluted elements into the story. So in the first movie, they have to figure out who's the Thing. First, they consider a blood test, but that idea is ruined when someone gets access to the blood supply and contaminates it. Later into the movie, McCree devises a new test.
We're gonna draw a little bit of everybody's blood. We're gonna find out who's the Thing. Watching Norris in there gave me the idea that maybe every part of him was a whole. Every little piece was an individual animal with a built-in desire to protect its own life. You see, when a man bleeds, it's just tissue. The blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive. Crawl away from a hot needle, say.
This actually works, and they're able to deduct who is and isn't human. And no, I'm not gonna fucking say it! So in this movie, they completely scrap the whole blood test idea and go for a much dumber approach.
Lars has feelings. So he's human. It can't imitate inorganic material.
Now this might actually sound pretty clever, but here's the issue. How the hell is the alien not able to insert foreign objects into its own body? It can shapeshift into anything it wants, so what the hell is stopping it? It's not like it has its own separate immune system that attacks anything that's foreign. It can control any part of its body in any way it wants thanks to its own hive mind of individual supercells. So what's making it want to spit out anything that isn't made out of animal cells? By that logic, it wouldn't be able to imitate your hair and nails. That shit isn't made out of cells, it's made out of keratin. So why the hell is it not able to at the very least insert objects into its own body and morph itself around them? Yes, the indestructible organism that's only impervious to fire can't process a fucking dental filling. Then of course this scene happens.
You know how I knew you were human? When you showed it back at base?
No.
Your earring. It was your other ear.
Really? It can't even put on a goddamn earring? Just shapeshift a fucking hole in your ear and put it back in! You'd think the same creature that's able to perfectly replicate human memory would also think to, I don't know, make sure it's wearing the correct fucking apparel? Also, really convenient that almost everyone on the base had a metal filling.
Right now, it's at least something. A way to eliminate some of us.
So I'm gonna get killed because I floss.
No, this is a very efficient system of figuring out who's a highly dangerous alien life form. The blood test made sense, so why replace it with this? Not to mention how terrible the writing is in general for the whole cat and mouse game. In the original movie, figuring out who was and wasn't the alien was genuinely intriguing. There are entire video essays and fan theories dedicated to explaining every intricate detail involved in the actors' performances for each character and all the subtle mannerisms and key points that were carefully crafted into the original movie. These vague details are balanced to create a perfect sense of mystery, but in this movie it's not intriguing at all. I saw this guy turning from a mile away. The reveals are only ever done for shock value. There's no tension or build up to any of it. It doesn't leave you to make educated guesses on who is and isn't human and how they might have gotten assimilated. It just fucking happens. And then you're like, oh, I guess that random asshole I didn't care about was an alien. Not to mention how the characters never give a shit about specific precautions like preparing their own meals, destroying all communications with the outside world, or figuring out how someone could have gotten infected. So their helicopter crashed with an alien on board and you're not concerned at all that it could still be alive at the crash site. The goal is to destroy every trace of it, or else a rescue team could find it and it could infect all life on Earth. I guess they don't give a shit. Okay. The last problem with the alien is that it just doesn't seem as dangerous in this movie. Like, yeah, it's more mobile in this movie, but despite that, the way it attacks people is just so ridiculous, aside from a few exceptions. The best example of this is at the end of the film when it turns into a giant monster, and in this scene it really feels like she's shielded by a massive wall of plot armor. Instead of getting a grip on her to start the process of assimilation, it just throws her around. Don't you just love it when the movie monster has the perfect opportunity to kill the protagonist but just holds off on it for no reason? Anyways, she's able to escape by running into a small tunnel, yet the thing is somehow unable to morph itself or separate into small pieces in order to get to her, like the film established it could do earlier. And by the time it does get a hold of her, it just decides to let her throw a grenade in its mouth and wait to blow up. So I'm sure you can see why this shit makes the thing look fucking stupid. It's an amazing concept, yet they managed to fuck it up at almost every step of the way. Anyways, now that I've explained why the ideas for this movie don't work, now we can get into the issue all of you have been expecting me to cover. There's an old saying, a camel is a horse designed by committee. Basically what that means is when you have a large group of people forcing decisions on a single idea, it becomes flawed and loses its original vision. This saying can apply heavily to the relationship between studios and directors. What I'm getting at here is there are many examples of potentially great films being sabotaged by studio interference. A classic example of this is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi was originally planning on having only two villains, Harry Osborn and Sandman, but then Sony stepped in and said that they wanted to include Venom along with him, despite obvious protests from Sam Raimi about how he didn't understand the character very well and knew it would interfere with the story he was making.
Just a movie that didn't work very well. You know, I had a lot of... I tried to make it work, but didn't really believe in all the characters, and so that can't be hidden from people who love Spider-Man. If a director doesn't love something, it's wrong of them to make it.
But in the end, he was forced to add Venom's character, and y'all know the rest. The Thing 2011 is a much more extreme example of studio interference. Some of you may be surprised by this, but the original special effects for this movie were actually really good. Instead of CG, they were going to use practical effects with animatronics, puppets, and dudes in rubber suits. And it's pretty apparent that the practical effects they were going to use were extremely impressive, arguably more so than the first movie. And this is evidenced by multiple behind-the-scenes photos and videos. But then, you guessed it, Universal Studios stepped in and said that they wanted all of it to be CGI'd, so they forced the filmmakers to reshoot the entire fucking movie and completely cover over the practical effects with computer animation, and that's the story of why the special effects for this movie are so goddamn awful. Now, I'm not saying that studio executives are all always a bunch of incompetent idiots. Sometimes they do make decisions that are appropriate. However, when you have a group of assholes who are completely disconnected from the people who are actually making the fucking movie, the decisions will always be for the worst. I seriously cannot imagine for the life of me how far their heads up were their own asses to make a decision like this. The main reason why CG for King Kong and characters from the Planet of the Apes trilogy look so realistic is because they include creatures that can be taken from real life. The Thing as a creature is not something that can be easily replicated in a computer and made to look realistic, considering it's usually a clump of biomass that can shapeshift, which is why you have to use practical effects if you want it to be convincing. The decision they made makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. I dare anyone to even attempt to give me a single justifiable reason for why they felt the need to force the filmmakers to do this. The practical effects for John Carpenter's movie were one of the primary reasons it was so memorable in the first place.
Get away from me! Retreating!
And not only do they have a much higher budget for this movie, but the technology for practical effects has improved dramatically since 1982. There are literal fan films that have more convincing special effects than this movie. So why the fuck would they decide against it even after the filmmakers spent hours crafting every scene? Nah, all that work you guys did, not needed since we can hire some underpaid computer graphics designers to do the work. We wouldn't want to entertain the audience so they give us their money. We just want them to give us their money. Let me ask you guys a question. What makes Lovecraftian horror scary? Before you answer that, let me ask a simpler question. Why are people scared of the dark? Pretty obvious, right? It's because you don't know what's in it. Whether it's a demon or a serial killer or God knows what else. Just that uncertainty is enough to gnaw at the back of your head, causing your imagination to create mental images for what could be possibly out there, lurking in the shadows. This is the reason Lovecraftian horror is scary. The fear of the unknown. John W. Campbell's Who Goes There and John Carpenter's The Thing are obvious examples of Lovecraftian horror, or cosmic horror as others would call it. The movie gives its audience a consistent sense of uncertainty and hopelessness throughout the entire duration of the film. You're only left making guesses on what will happen or when the monster will come out to snag each character to be assimilated. And even after the movie is over, you're still left with questions like, who created it? How did it get here? What happened to every character? Is it still a threat to humanity? And most importantly,
What the hell happened here?
now of course the prequel is giving an answer to that question. But the only question I'm asking by the end of this movie is why? Why do we need an explanation for what happened at the first research base? The fact of the matter is, mystery is the contributing factor to fear. If you take away the mystery, it's not going to be as scary now, is it? And that's the biggest problem with this movie, the idea itself. When you see the images of a bloody axe on the wall, charred ruins and corpses, and a fucking dude with his throat slit open, your imagination does the work for you. The truth is, I don't want to know the answers to these questions, or what happened at the original base. I just want to think about it. And if you insist on answering these questions with dumbass explanations, then you take away the sense of awe and wonder that made the original so great. This is the same bullshit mistake that Ridley Scott is making with the Alien prequels, creating bizarre and poorly thought out explanations that do nothing but hinder how people think of the original work. Incredibly, they were actually planning on making an explanation for how the thing was created and how it got to Earth, but thankfully it got removed before it made it into the final cut. And thank fucking God, honestly, as if there wasn't enough convoluted bullshit in this movie. Making a prequel just doesn't make sense to me. I'll admit, I would definitely love to see a sequel or a reinterpretation of The Thing, because there are so many interesting ideas that you can do with this concept, even ideas that haven't been yet fully explored in either movies. And there are plenty of comic books that came out before the prequel that reinforce this notion. The blueprints for a good story were right there, yet you decided to go for the most lazy and uninspired idea possible. This movie is nothing more than a wasted opportunity. It doesn't excel at anything, the music doesn't complement the scenario or even build tension, and when it tries to do anything new, it ends up being fucking stupid. It's shit like this that makes me wonder why it's so common for terrible ideas to be put on the screen while ideas that are good are thrown to the side. But I guess that's just the world we live in. Now, before I end this video, I want to give a special thanks to John Carpenter. Now, I know he'll probably never see this video, but I feel inclined to say we all have to give him a big thanks for all the shit he went through to make this classic masterpiece, and it was only years later was able to get the endless amount of recognition it deserves. In other words, he pretty much died for your sins, and y'all need to pay him homage. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10.
Say it!
Among Us.
To my clips, I squeeze the gap. To my clips, I squeeze